Today, in Real Life Archives, the man who invented a fake country.
We're going to unpack the most audacious, elaborate, and ultimately deadly scam of the entire 19th century. Now just imagine, for a second, having the absolute nerve to look the smartest, most powerful bankers in the world right in the eye and sell them something that didn't even exist on a map. Well, one guy actually pulled that off. He didn't just sell a bridge or forge a painting, he sold an entire country, completely made up out of thin air. It is a wild story of absolute arrogance, master-level manipulation, and the truly tragic consequences of blind trust. Let's get into it. But before we introduce the man behind the curtain, I want to hit you with the devastating reality of this fraud right up front. The number on your screen is chilling. 80%. That was the mortality rate for the innocent colonists who bought into this monumental lie. We aren't just talking about people losing their life savings here, though. They definitely did. We're talking about entire families who packed up and got on ships chasing a tropical paradise, only to be dumped into an absolutely ruthless, hostile environment. Almost 8 out of every 10 people who made that trip suffered a slow, agonizing death from starvation, malaria, and tropical diseases, all for a utopia that never actually existed. So meet the architect of this massive catastrophe, Gregor MacGregor. He was a highly charismatic Scottish ex-soldier with just a genuinely staggering amount of self-confidence. Now, MacGregor had actually fought in the South American Wars of Independence, and he took that tiny little fraction of legitimate military experience and blew it up into a colossal persona. He showed up in London wearing these self-designed uniforms completely covered in gold braid, flashing fake medals, and calling himself the cazique, which basically means prince, of a place he called Poyais. And with a totally masterful grasp of human psychology, he just completely manipulated the rigid British class system and global financial centers using sheer, unadulterated arrogance. Okay, to understand how something this massive could even happen, we really need to track the timeline and see how astonishingly fast this whole lie escalated. In 1820, MacGregor managed to secure a completely worthless land grant from a local indigenous leader on the Mosquito Coast. By 1822, he had transformed that useless swamp into a massive, highly sophisticated marketing blitz right in the heart of London. And by 1823, the first waves of settlers were already living out a deadly disaster in the middle of the jungle. In just 3 short years, a stretch of empty coastline was turned into a mass casualty financial fraud. The absolutely crucial thing to grasp here is the core of the illusion itself. What exactly was Poyais? Well, according to MacGregor, it was a booming 30,000 square kilometer Central American nation. But the terrifying truth is that Poyais was completely fabricated, invented from absolutely nothing. It was basically an elaborate psychological trap dressed up as an independent sovereign state. MacGregor didn't just come up with a catchy name. He literally gave this phantom country its own laws, its own flag, a full military structure, and even diplomatic offices in Europe. He made the invisible feel tangible and totally unquestionable. MacGregor knew perfectly well that a lie needs weight if people are going to believe it, like literal weight. So he published a massive 355-page guidebook to validate his fictional nation. And to make it seem completely objective, he didn't even put his own name on it. He published it under the fake alias Captain Thomas Strangeways. This book was an absolute masterpiece of narrative invention. It meticulously detailed the exact climate, the native plants and animals, and the supposedly perfect geography of Poyais. Investors were literally carrying this book around under their arms like an untouchable Bible, quoting its pages to justify handing over their entire life savings. And let's talk about the dazzling pitch he gave them. MacGregor sold the London elite on a truly idyllic utopia. He claimed that the capital city, St. Joseph, had grand opera houses, a centralized banking system, magnificent architecture, and a highly cultured society. He talked about soils so fertile you barely had to farm it to get massive crops, and rivers that were practically overflowing with pure gold. It was exactly what a cold, gloomy, incredibly class-obsessed London society wanted to hear. A sun-drenched paradise where literally anyone could become an aristocrat overnight. But as you can probably guess, the difference between that magnificent fantasy and the grim reality couldn't have been more cruel. On one hand, you had this sublime illusion of abundant crops, sophisticated culture, and a booming economy. On the other hand, the reality waiting for them was a malaria-infested jungle on the Mosquito Coast that featured exactly 4 rotting, rundown shacks. There were no opera houses, no gold flowing in the rivers. There wasn't even a safe harbor to dock the ships after crossing the ocean. It was just an impenetrable wilderness, silently waiting to devour its victims. Now, it's totally fair to ask, how in the world did anyone fall for a deception on this level? To get that, we have to look at the psychology of the era. MacGregor perfectly exploited the financial frenzy that kicked off right after the Napoleonic Wars. Britain had just come out of years of deep conflicts, and the financial markets were absolutely flush with cash, desperately looking for a place to go. At the same time, newly independent Latin American nations were the hottest, most coveted investments around. MacGregor capitalized on this massive hunger for exotic high-yield investments, basically turning post-war London's greed into his own personal piggy bank. And let me tell you, the sheer magnitude of this financial fraud is mind-blowing. Look at this number, 200,000 British pounds. That was the gigantic national loan MacGregor successfully raised on the London Stock Exchange for the so-called government of Poyais. In today's money, we are talking about tens of millions of dollars. And he didn't do this in some shady back alley. He secured this colossal loan through highly respectable London banking houses like Perrin & Company. By getting legitimate financial institutions to back his fake sovereign debt, he effectively laundered his fantasy into an undeniable financial reality. The true genius of this scam, how he actually convinced the smartest bankers, was the illusion of bureaucracy. MacGregor set up a London office that operated exactly like a real embassy, complete with a constant flow of officials and paperwork. He wasn't just selling land, he was selling fake official titles for exorbitant prices. You could actually buy a military commission as a captain in the Poyais army, or a prestigious job like the Royal Choirmaster. He even printed custom Poyais currency and let investors trade their real British pounds for this totally worthless paper. He deeply understood that if you create enough paperwork, stamps, and formal red tape, people will just automatically assume the country backing it has to be real. But perhaps the cruelest, most heartbreaking part of this entire fraud was the specific audience he targeted. MacGregor intentionally aimed his deception right at his own people, the Scottish Highlanders. He knew exactly what buttons to push. He played on their deep hunger for dignity, their burning desire for upward social mobility, and their inherent trust in a fellow Scotsman. He promised poor farmers and shoemakers that just by crossing the ocean, they would become lords of vast estates. He wasn't just selling land and titles, he was selling the ultimate escape route from the rigid British class system that was keeping them trapped in poverty. So the narrative tension really hits a boiling point in late 1822, when the first ships finally set sail from Europe. Picture this vivid scene, 250 visibly excited, hopeful settlers sailing directly toward their doom. They left port equipped with bagpipes, proudly wearing their traditional kilts, and lugging heavy chests completely filled with useless Poyais currency and totally fake property deeds. They had absolute, unwavering faith in their charismatic leader. During the voyage, they were literally singing joyful songs about the tropical paradise waiting for them, completely unaware they were sailing straight into an inescapable death trap. And then comes the slow, paralyzing, horrific moment of realization. The colonists finally reach the exact coordinates of Poyais and disembark onto the beach. They're looking around, expecting to see the majestic domes of St. Joseph and all these bustling markets. But instead, absolute silence. There is no city, no roads, zero infrastructure, no local officials waiting to greet them. Just a wild, deadly, impenetrable jungle. And then the ships that brought them eventually pull up their anchors and leave, leaving them completely stranded on a remote beach. They're holding useless paper money, facing imminent starvation, and surrounded by swarms of disease-carrying insects. To make an already desperate situation even worse, whatever tiny shred of legal legitimacy might have existed was quickly destroyed. The actual sovereign of that coastal territory, King George Frederick Augustine II of the Mosquito Nation, soon found out what was happening on his land. So in early 1823, he officially and bluntly revoked the minor land grant he had given MacGregor years prior. His decree made it very clear that MacGregor had fraudulently assumed the title of Cazique and illegally declared the territory an independent state. That royal order instantly shattered whatever minimal legal illusions those terrified settlers might have been clinging to. What followed was the absolute psychological collapse of the settlers. The mental impact was honestly just as devastating as the physical one. For so long, they had held on to this majestic promise of becoming wealthy landowners and starting a lineage of greatness. But the reality staring them in the face was ruthless. They were dying quickly and painfully from starvation and tropical infections in the mud. Survivors later recounted with total horror how these desperate colonists, having lost all hope, ended up just tossing their beautifully decorated Poyais documents and stacks of printed currency right into the jungle swamp. The fantasy was dead, and the brutal, suffocating reality of sheer survival took over. When the grim news of this disaster finally crossed the ocean back to London, along with a tiny handful of deeply traumatized survivors, the world assumed the game was finally up for MacGregor. But his reaction proves just how much of a sociopath he truly was. Instead of showing an ounce of remorse, apologizing, or even hiding from the law, he became the ultimate master of gaslighting. He went straight to the British press and publicly blamed the victims for the failure. He called the dead and dying colonists cowardly, lazy, and incompetent. He audaciously claimed his nation-building project was perfect, but that they just lacked the Scottish vigor needed to build a civilization. He entirely deflected his own guilt by turning his victims into the villains. And amazingly enough, his outrageous strategy actually worked. The British legal system completely failed to hold him accountable for the massive loss of life and stolen fortunes. The fraud was so intricate, and the whole idea of investing in foreign sovereign debt was such a new legal concept back then that authorities literally couldn't figure out how to successfully prosecute him in court. So, intelligently taking advantage of all this bureaucratic confusion, MacGregor just quickly liquidated whatever stolen assets he had left, quietly packed his bags, and fled to France. And proving he just couldn't help himself, he tried to orchestrate the exact same scam in Paris, this time targeting French investors with a translated version of his lethal Poyais fantasy. Fast forward to 1839, where the narrative takes an even stranger, truly surreal turn. After bouncing around Europe for years, constantly moving, and facing a few minor legal arrests that drained his funds, MacGregor realized his golden era of selling fake land was permanently over. So he decides to catch a ship and move to Venezuela. Remember, he had actually fought there briefly in his youth. Upon arriving in Caracas, he completely reinvents himself for society one more time. He's no longer the dazzling prince covered in gold. He presents himself humbly as a deeply misunderstood, impoverished war hero who had sacrificed everything for the sacred independence of Latin America. This was without a doubt his ultimate con, and maybe his boldest on an institutional level, literally colonizing his own history and rewriting his legacy. MacGregor wrote these incredibly eloquent, dramatic, and hugely manipulative letters to the Venezuelan government, demanding official recognition and financial compensation for his supposed invaluable military services. And almost incredibly for modern historians, the state bought the whole story. They gave him full Venezuelan citizenship, formally restored his prestigious rank as a military general, and granted him a generous military pension for life. The very man who coldly orchestrated one of the deadliest frauds in British history was now living comfortably, respected in high society, and funded directly by the Venezuelan treasury. Which brings us to the incredibly dark, depressing irony of his final escape from justice. Gregor MacGregor, the man directly responsible for hundreds of agonizing, completely preventable deaths, the man who ruthlessly stole the life savings of his own working-class countrymen, died peacefully in his bed, surrounded by comforts, in the year 1845. He never spent a single day in a prison cell facing the consequences of the Poyais tragedy. In fact, upon his death, he was honored by the state. He was buried with full military honors in the illustrious Caracas Cathedral, resting eternally among actual national heroes. His final silent act was ensuring that his gravestone lied to the world just as majestically as he did during his life. There is a quote that perfectly captures the essence of this whole explainer. To a fraudster, facts are irrelevant. It was his fiction that fed his cause. This really just sums up our entire analysis today. MacGregor's undeniable magnetic charisma and his deep, almost clinical understanding of human desire completely overpowered basic logic, documented geography, and hard facts. He knew perfectly well that if you can offer a person a dream that is captivating enough, a dream that miraculously seems to solve all their social and economic problems at once, that person will actively, and sometimes angrily, ignore the real facts right in front of them just to protect that comforting fiction. And this isn't just dusty history. We can connect this lesson directly to the mechanisms of modern finance we see today. The Poyais scam wasn't just some quirky 19th century crime. It stands as a terrifyingly early masterclass in how to build speculative sovereign debt bubbles and execute mass psychological manipulation. MacGregor invented techniques that modern corporate fraudsters are literally still using right now, creating a false sense of urgency, manufacturing social proof using authority figures, and using incredibly complex legal and bureaucratic jargon to brilliantly mask a core that is completely empty. This story proves that the fundamental architecture of financial fraud really hasn't changed much in over 200 years. As we take one last look at the brilliant illustration of the phantom nation of Poyais, the biggest, most endearing, and maybe the most disturbing takeaway is this. Gregor MacGregor proved to the world that a sovereign nation, or a supposedly safe-backed investment, can really just be a well-told story, a captivating narrative that a large group of desperate people collectively decide to believe, shutting their eyes to reality. He sold an absolute void, wrapped it skillfully in a colorful flag, gave it a fancy name, and people gladly handed over their fortunes and their lives for it, simply because that story was exactly what their hearts desperately wanted to hear. Which, at the end of this deep historical dive, leaves us with a pretty heavy, provocative question about human nature. Why are we so incredibly vulnerable to the illusion of sudden wealth? Why does our logic, our survival instinct, and our common sense just instantly shut down the second someone confidently promises us a magical shortcut to success and paradise? I really want to know what you guys think about this vulnerability in the human mind, so please drop your valuable opinions in the comment section below. And hey, if you enjoyed this historical explainer and want to keep discovering more incredible stories from the past, make sure you hit that subscribe button for Real Life Archives. Thanks so much for joining me today.
This is just one story. There are many more you wouldn't believe. Subscribe for the next one.